The smell of roasted herbs and garlic butter filled the air as I slowly set my napkin on my lap. My son's dining room gleamed with everything I'd once dreamed of for him. Polished marble floors, soft amber chandeliers, a table that could seat 12, though tonight there were only 6 of us. I sat at one end beside the window, where the light from the street lamps fell through the curtains like quiet silver threads. It was supposed to be a nice family dinner. My son, his wife, their 2 teenage children, and me. The kind you see in those glossy magazines where everyone's smiling and the table looks perfect. I had even brought a bottle of my late husband's favorite wine, thinking it might remind my son of the old days when we all used to laugh around a much smaller table, in a much smaller home. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. But as the minutes passed, I realized this dinner wasn't about warmth or love. It was a show. A performance for his ego. "Mother," my son said, carving into his steak like he was slicing through glass. "I told you you don't have to come all the way across town every week. We know it's hard for you to move around at your age." His tone was smooth, polite even, but I caught the smirk on his wife's lips as she reached for her wineglass. "I told her the same thing," she said. "But you know how she is. Insists on doing everything herself." They laughed softly, the way people do when they're pretending it's harmless teasing. My fork trembled slightly as I tried to cut my chicken. I smiled because I'd learned long ago that silence speaks louder than pride. "I enjoy the visit," I said, voice calm. "It's good to see everyone." My grandson, sitting 2 seats away, didn't look up. He was busy on his phone, thumbs flying across the screen. My granddaughter, pretty and sharp-tongued like her mother, sighed loudly. "Grandma, do you have to keep bringing up stories about Dad when he was young? You've told them 100 times." The table chuckled again. And that's when I felt the sting. Not from their words, I'd heard worse, but from the way they all avoided looking at me afterward, as if I was already fading into the wallpaper. My son set down his knife and leaned back. "She forgets," he said with a little grin. "Mom's memory isn't what it used to be. The other day she called my office asking if I still work at the same company. I told her, 'Mother, I run the damn company.'" His wife laughed first, then the kids joined in. And I took another bite of my chicken, chewed slowly, and smiled again. If only they knew. I looked around the table, at the glittering chandelier, the expensive silverware, the glass vases that matched the drapes. All of it funded by the very man I'd once married and the sacrifices I'd made for decades. My husband and I built the foundation for everything my son now owned. Every business trip, every loan we signed, every sleepless night in that small gas station where we started. All of it so he could live this life of comfort. And now he sat there, smirking at the woman who raised him. I folded my napkin and placed it neatly beside my plate. "It's true," I said softly. "I do forget some things these days. But there are certain things I remember very clearly." He chuckled, not catching the weight in my tone. "Oh, like what, Mother?" "The time you burned Dad's pie at Thanksgiving." The laughter came again. I simply looked at him, really looked. The gray in his hair, the expensive watch on his wrist, the same brown eyes that once looked up at me in wonder when he was a boy. Now they looked down with pity. I thought of the last conversation I had with my lawyer that morning. The one where I'd finally decided it was time to make some changes. Quiet ones. Final ones. I'd spent years letting them treat me like a guest in my own family. Forgotten, tolerated, and sometimes even mocked. But tonight was different. Tonight I didn't come here for the meal. Came for closure. My daughter-in-law poured more wine. "Mom, you should really consider moving to one of those nice senior communities. They have activities, friends, people your age. Wouldn't that be fun?" There it was again. That syrupy tone people use when they're hiding something cruel behind fake concern. I smiled gently. "That's very thoughtful, dear," I said. "But I'm quite happy where I am. I still have a few things to take care of before I go anywhere." My son raised an eyebrow. "Things to take care of?" "Yes," I said, setting my glass down. "Just some paperwork. It's amazing what one can accomplish when everyone assumes she's just an old burden. The table went quiet for half a second, just long enough for them to realize I wasn't entirely joking. Then my grandson broke the silence. "Grandma, did you get your will done yet?" he asked innocently, not realizing the irony. I smiled at him, my eyes soft. "Oh, sweetheart," I said. "That was the first thing I did this morning." My son laughed, trying to brush it off. "I told you, Mother, you don't need to stress about that stuff. We'll handle everything when the time comes." "When the time comes," I repeated quietly. "Yes, I imagine you will." He didn't hear the undertone, that slow, simmering truth hiding beneath my calm voice. He just went back to eating, slicing into his steak like nothing in the world could ever touch him. I glanced toward the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked toward the hour, steady and precise. My heart beat with the same rhythm. 5 minutes. That's all it would take. 5 minutes, and the balance of power at this table would shift forever. My mind wandered briefly, to the years before all this arrogance took root. To when my husband was alive, and our son was just a boy helping us run that small gas station at the edge of town. He'd wipe the oil off his hands and smile up at me with pride when a customer praised his manners. He used to say, "One day, Mom, I'll buy you a big house where you'll never have to work again." And he did. But he also built walls so high around himself that I was no longer welcome inside. A tear burned at the corner of my eye, but I blinked it away before anyone could see. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I took another slow sip of wine and asked, "How's business been lately?" My son smirked, as if the question were beneath him. "Flourishing, of course. We just closed another deal last week. $12 million. It's all about strategy, something you and Dad taught me." He said it with pride, but I caught the irony. What he didn't know was that much of that strategy had come from my husband's old network. Contacts I'd quietly maintained even after his passing. Contacts that had called me just last week, asking about the ownership documents, the ones I'd had transferred. I looked at my son's wife, who was still watching me with that smug half-smile. She thought I was just some fragile old woman with nothing left but memories. I turned to her and said gently, "You've decorated the place beautifully. It reminds me of our old house in the country." "Oh, that's sweet," she said. "Except this one actually has taste." Her laughter filled the room, sharp, brittle, cruel. I didn't respond. I just smiled and nodded, because she had no idea what was coming. My husband always said patience is a weapon when used quietly. And tonight mine was sharpened to perfection. The ticking of the clock grew louder in my head. My son lifted his wineglass for a toast. "To family," he said proudly, looking around the table. I lifted mine too. "To lessons," I whispered. Outside, the evening sky deepened into twilight, streaker with violet and gold. The house glowed from within, laughter echoing from people who thought they'd already written my ending. But endings are funny things. Sometimes they come just when someone else thinks the story is over. In exactly 5 minutes, my son's phone would buzz. He'd read the message from my lawyer, confirming the document changes. The company he thought he owned would no longer be in his name. The trust fund he used for his children's schooling would be frozen. And the mansion he lived in, this very one, would belong to someone who still treated family with dignity. All because he couldn't stop humiliating me at dinner. He didn't know it yet, but tonight, as he lifted his glass and smirked at me across the table, he just toasted away his own inheritance. And as for me, I finally have peace. I glanced at the clock again. For minutes, my son looked at me. "Something wrong, Mother?" Smiled. "Oh no, dear. I was just remembering something your father once said." He leaned back, amused. "And what was that?" "That life has a way of humbling those who forget where they came from." He chuckled. "Well, let's hope it doesn't happen to us, right?" I nodded slowly. "Oh," I said softly. "It already has." The air around the table shifted, just slightly, but enough that even the chandelier light seemed to dim. My son poured himself another glass of wine, pretending not to notice the tension tightening between us. He never could stand silence. It made him nervous, reminded him that not everything was under his control. He raised his fork, ready to dig into another bite of his steak, when the faint buzz of a phone broke the quiet. Came from his pocket. A small, unremarkable sound, yet it froze him mid-bite. He frowned, pulling out his phone, glancing down at the screen. I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. The laughter died around the table. "Everything all right, dear?" his wife asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer. His eyes scanned the screen once, then again. I could see his pupils narrow, his fingers gripping the phone tighter. The color drained slowly from his face. "What is it?" she pressed, her voice cracking slightly. He looked up at me, just a flicker of a look, but in that instant I saw it all: disbelief, confusion, and fear. Then he swallowed hard and said, "Excuse me," before standing abruptly and walking toward the living room. No one else spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier and the muffled footsteps of my son pacing behind the archway. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. "Well," I said softly, smiling at the others, "seems like dinner's about to get interesting." My daughter-in-law blinked, unsure whether to laugh or be concerned. "Did something happen?" she asked. "Oh," I said, folding my napkin neatly again. "He'll tell you soon enough." Her expression stiffened. I could almost see the wheels turning in her mind, the fragile comfort of a woman realizing something wasn't quite right in her perfect world. From the living room came the faint sound of my son's voice. Low, tense, urgent. "No, no, that can't be right," he said. Then louder. "What do you mean, transferred?" My granddaughter jumped. "Dad!" He stormed back into the dining room, his face red now, his phone still in hand. "Mother," he said sharply, voice trembling between anger and panic. "What the hell did you do?" I set down my glass and looked up, calm as ever. "I beg your pardon." "The company," he snapped. "The accounts. My lawyer just—" He stopped, biting his lip, his breath quickening. His wife stood now too. "What's going on?" she demanded. "What is he talking about?" My son pointed a trembling finger at me. She had everything transferred. The company, the properties. She's changed everything." The kids looked confused. "What do you mean?" my grandson asked. My son slammed his hand on the table. "I mean she's cut me out." The silverware rattled. The chandelier light quivered on the crystal glasses. I didn't flinch. I simply smiled, that same gentle, infuriating smile that he used to hate when he was a boy. The one that said "I told you so" without a word spoken. "I didn't cut you out, dear," I said softly. "You did that all on your own." He stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. "What are you talking about?" "You see," I continued, keeping my tone slow and deliberate. "After your father passed, I spent years thinking about how to preserve what we built. About how to make sure our legacy, his legacy, went to those who understood what it meant to work for it. Not to those who mocked the hands that built it." His wife's face twisted. "Are you trying to say—" "Yes," I interrupted gently. "Everything is gone, darling. From you, at least." He gasped. "You can't do that." I tilted my head. "I already did." For a long moment there was only silence. Then my son let out a sharp, humorless laugh, the kind people give when they're trying to convince themselves the nightmare isn't real. "You're bluffing," he said. "You wouldn't dare." I reached into my purse, calm as a whisper, and pulled out a thin, cream-colored envelope, sealed with the silver stamp of my attorney. I placed it beside my wine glass. "I don't bluff," I said. He stared at it, his eyes flicking back to my face, searching for a hint of mercy. "There's no way," he muttered. "You can't just—" "Your father and I built that business from scratch," I said, my voice firmer now. "We bled for it. You didn't inherit success. You were handed it. And instead of gratitude, you served me humiliation on fine china." I glanced at his children. "Do you know what your father said about me tonight?" They looked at each other uneasily. "He called me a burden," I said softly. "Right here in front of all of you. But that burden paid for this house, that car you drive, the education you boast about. Everything." My granddaughter's face fell. My grandson stared at the floor. My son's wife tried to regain control. "You're overreacting," she said quickly. "He was just joking." I looked at her with eyes that had seen too many winters to be fooled by lies. A joke loses its humor when it becomes habit. My son slammed his fist on the table again, making the plates jump. "You can't just take everything away. I've worked my whole life for this." "No," I said quietly. "Your father and I worked for this. You simply enjoyed the benefits." His breath came faster now. "You'll regret this. You'll end up with nothing, Anne." I leaned back in my chair. "I already have nothing," I said softly. "That's what you made sure of. You stripped me of respect long before I stripped you of wealth." He opened his mouth to speak, but that's when the phone buzzed again. Another message. His eyes darted to the screen. The blood drained completely from his face. His wife noticed immediately. "What? What now?" He swallowed. They've already locked the accounts." Her mouth fell open. "What do you mean locked?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his jaw trembling. That's when I saw it. The moment the realization hit him like a cold wave. His empire wasn't his anymore. He slowly sank back into his chair. The once proud man, the one who used to talk over me, now sat silent, shaking slightly, unable to speak. The room was still. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. I took another sip of water. "I told you 5 minutes can change everything," I murmured. His fork slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the plate. The sound echoed like thunder in the silence. I looked around the table, letting the quiet settle. My grandchildren stared at their father with wide eyes. His wife stood frozen, pale as marble. Finally I broke the silence. "Don't worry," I said. "You won't be destitute. I made sure of that. I left you with enough to live comfortably, but not arrogantly." He blinked, barely processing my words. "I transferred the rest to a foundation," I continued, my voice calm. "For single mothers and widows. Women who worked their entire lives to build something for others, only to be forgotten when they grew old." My granddaughter whispered, "Grandma, you really did all that?" I smiled gently. "I did, sweetheart. And one day, when you grow up, you'll understand that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness." My son buried his face in his hands. His wife started to cry quietly, not out of guilt but out of fear. Fear of losing the comfort she thought was permanent. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the tile. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "It was enlightening." As I turned to leave, my son finally lifted his head. "Mother," he choked, voice trembling. "Please, you can't just walk away." I paused, hand on the back of my chair. "That's exactly what I'm doing," I said. "Because for years I stayed hoping you'd remember who you were. But you didn't. So now I'll remember who I am." And with that I walked out, past the glittering chandelier, past the silent stairs, past the home that used to feel like mine but never truly was. Outside, the cool night air greeted me like an old friend. The stars shimmered faintly above, as if the heavens themselves approved. I reached my car, slipped inside, and smiled for the first time in years. Not out of vengeance, but out of peace. Because for once, I wasn't just the forgotten old woman at the end of the table. I was the author of my own ending. And they would remember that sound, the soft clatter of a fork falling, for the rest of their lives. A week had passed since that dinner. 7 quiet, peaceful days. The first truly peaceful ones I'd had in years. For the first time in a long time, I woke up to the sound of birds instead of raised voices. The air in my little cottage smelled of cinnamon and morning dew. The sun filtered through lace curtains, scattering gold dust across the floorboards. My hands trembled slightly as I poured my coffee, not from age, but from the quiet rush of realization. Freedom had its own flavor. I looked at the small stack of papers on the kitchen table, the official transfer documents signed and sealed. The house, the business, the trust, all finalized. Every dollar accounted for. Every intention made clear. I wasn't cruel. I hadn't done what I did out of revenge, though the world might have seen it that way. No, this was something far deeper. This was about teaching respect, the one thing money can never buy and power can never demand. The knock came mid-morning. 3 heavy, deliberate thuds. I didn't need to ask who it was. When I opened the door, there he stood, my son. The proud man who had once spoken to me like I was a burden now looked like a ghost of himself. His shoulders sagged. His eyes were ringed with sleeplessness. He wasn't dressed in his expensive suit anymore. Just jeans and a wrinkled shirt. "Mother," he said softly. His voice, once so sure, so sharp, cracked on the first syllable. "Good morning," I replied, calm as ever. "Come in." He stepped inside hesitantly, as if crossing some invisible boundary he'd never noticed before. His gaze wandered around the small cottage, the worn furniture, the framed photos, the scent of coffee. He seemed surprised that a place so simple could feel warm. We sat opposite each other at the table. I slid a cup of coffee toward him. "You look tired," I said. He let out a dry laugh. "That's one way to put it." For a long while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the small wall clock and the faint rustle of the curtains. Finally he said, "I deserve it, don't I?" I looked at him quietly. "I've been going over everything in my head," he continued. "That night, what I said, what I always said." He rubbed his temples. "I don't even know when I became that person." "Pride," I said simply. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, pride." He swallowed. "And greed." His hands shook as he reached for the coffee cup. "When Dad died, I thought I was stepping up for the family, taking charge, keeping things together. But somewhere along the way I stopped being a son and started being a boss. Even to you." I smiled faintly. "You always did like control." He sighed. "And you always let me think I had it." "That was my mistake," I said quietly. "Sometimes love blinds us to the lessons we should have taught earlier." He leaned back, looking at the ceiling. "Everyone's furious. My wife, she's been crying non-stop. The kids are confused. I'm trying to explain, but I don't even know what to say." "Tell them the truth," I said. "That you lost sight of what matters." He looked down. "And what if they already hate me for it?" I reached across the table and placed my hand over his old, frail fingers over strong, trembling ones. "Then you start over. From the beginning. Like your father and I did." He looked up at me then, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy he used to be. The one who'd scraped his knees playing in the yard, who'd run to me when thunder scared him, who used to say, "Mom, I'll always take care of you." The silence between us softened. He whispered, "I don't deserve forgiveness." I smiled gently. "That's not for you to decide." He blinked. "You're forgiving me." "I'm forgiving myself," I said. "For letting it go on so long." He exhaled. The kind of sigh that comes when a weight you didn't know you were carrying finally lifts. "So what happens now?" I looked out the window, where sunlight danced through the trees. "Now I live. And so do you. But differently." He frowned slightly. "Differently how?" I turned back to him, eyes steady. "Do you remember the foundation your father and I dreamed of starting? For widows, single mothers, struggling families." He nodded slowly. "I've made it real," I said. "The funds we built, they're no longer sitting in vaults collecting dust. They're working, helping, healing." He smiled weakly. "Dad would have liked that." "Yes," I said softly. "He would have." He hesitated. "And me? What am I supposed to do now?" I tilted my head. "Work. Not for wealth, for worth." He looked confused. I reached into my purse and slid a folded piece of paper toward him. "That's a job offer." He blinked, taken aback. "A what?" "A position," I said. At the foundation. As director of operations. If you want it. He stared at me, speechless. It doesn't pay what you're used to, I continued. But it'll fill something else you've been missing, purpose. He swallowed hard. Why would you trust me after everything? I smiled softly. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Even my son. He stared down at the paper for a long time, the edges trembling between his fingers. Then he whispered, "Thank you." I nodded once. "Don't thank me. Just do better." That evening after he left, I sat by the window and watched the sun set behind the hills. The world looked calm, that kind of golden calm that comes after a storm. My heart was full but not heavy. You see, I didn't do what I did to ruin him. I did it to remind him of us. Of where he came from. Of what family really means when the money's gone and all that's left is love and memory. He needed to fall, not to be broken but to remember how to rise. The next morning I got a call. It was my granddaughter. Her voice was timid but warm. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart. Dad told us everything. About the foundation. About what you did." "Waited," she continued softly. "We just wanted to say, we're proud of you. And we're sorry." Tears filled my eyes, but my smile didn't fade. "That's enough, darling. That's all I needed." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, letting the sound of forgiveness linger in the quiet. That night, I made a cup of chamomile tea, lit the small lamp beside my rocking chair, and looked at the family photo on the mantel. My late husband's face smiled back at me from the frame. "Well, love," I whispered. "I think we did all right." The wind outside rustled the trees like a soft applause. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from anger, it comes from grace. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is peace.